Are you a brand new birder who wants to know where to get started with this great hobby? Or maybe you're a more experienced birder who is looking for ways to add to their craft. Regardless, this is the video for you because I'm going to cover a whole list of educational resources for the wonderful world of birding. Hey, welcome back to Hawk in the Lens. If you're new here, my name is Hawken and it is my goal to get more people excited about birding. Today I'm talking education resources. I'm going to cover books, online resources, different types of media, and more. Make sure to stick around to the end because I'm going to share a really fun example how you could pick up some little facts and tidbits about birding, as well as walking you through a specific aspect that I have been trying to learn and how I'm putting my own tips in place. Before I dive into the resources, I just want to make a quick note that birding is obviously really broad. There are so many different things you can learn within this hobby. Maybe you're focused on shorebird identification. Maybe you are looking at getting a spotting scope and you want to know what the different specs and stuff mean. I bring up these examples just to show and illustrate that it is easier to learn something about birding if you have a goal in mind or a focus that you're really dialed into. In simpler terms, it helps to know what you're trying to accomplish. All right, it's time to get into the resources. Everything I'm about to mention is going to be linked down in the description below. Just to note, some of these links might be Amazon affiliate things, just to help support me as a creator. No extra cost to you, it just gives me a small kickback should you decide to purchase using one of my links. Section number one, we're going to focus on the thing probably most commonly associated with birding, books. Now I have a couple of different types of books, but we'll start with the example you're probably expecting, field guides. Now field guides are obviously already very popular in the world of birding, and there's a bunch of different ones. You can get state-specific ones, you can get ones for your entire region, or more recently, there have been very niche field guides gaining in popularity. Now I'll mention a few just off the bat. There's a very common yellow book that's familiar to many people from National Geographic, The Field Guide to Birds of North America. Got that one right behind me. I have all of them right behind me actually. My personal favorite are the Sibley guides. So I have this bigger one, which is just Sibley's overall guide to birds in North America. And then I have the more specific, slightly smaller guide to the western birds of North America since I'm based in Utah. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, because I'm based in the US too, these are specific towards my region. I do not yet have birding guides for Europe, Asia, Oceania, or any of the other regions around the world. I also have the Birds of Utah field guide that I got when I first initially started birding. That one's a little old though, it's from 2003. And then I have a few other field guides that are even older than that from the 70s. Now I don't ever use those to actually try and identify birds or learn things about them. It's more a decorative piece for me or a fun thing to leaf through just to see how things have changed over the years. And that's kind of honestly what I would recommend for you if you're interested in getting a field guide, is to look for something that is a little more current. The Sibley guides are great. The one from National Geographic is good too. And there are some other ones out there as well that you might find useful. Try and make sure they're more recent, because over time birds change. They split into various species from an original species, or two different species sometimes occasionally get combined into a single one, or even the names of birds change. What used to be called the gray jay is now called the Canada jay, for example. There are also some very niche field guides out there too, like Stokes' Guide to Finches and the Gull Guide by Amar Ayesh. Those are two examples I've personally heard of, though I know there's plenty more, so you might find one of those interesting if you're really wanting to dial into a certain species of bird. And if you're looking for a free option, you could even get the Merlin app on your phone, which is a free field guide essentially in your pocket, which is pretty cool. Sticking in the realm of books though, there are a few other types of books. There's one specifically meant to be guides for bird watching itself. There's one called The Joy of Bird Watching. I haven't read this one personally, but it has some pretty good reviews on Amazon. There are also some other books that I currently have on my list of things to read on Goodreads, but I have not yet touched them yet. But I've heard very good things from a few of my birding friends. There's one, Better Living Through Birding by Christian Cooper. He talks about his experience birding coming from an underrepresented community in the outdoor industry. There's also Kingbird Highway by Ken Kaufman that I very much want to read. You might also enjoy some just backyard birding guides or some coffee table books. I'm gonna pull out a few here quick. I found this one for $5 at a local thrift store. It's a little old, but it's the Audubon Backyard Bird Watcher, Bird Feeders and Bird Gardens. This one was pretty cool as it shows different ways to set up your backyard to attract birds. And then here's another great coffee table book, What It's Like to Be a Bird. This one was a fun one to leaf through. It really only has common species, but it talks about some really fun facts about each of them. So you can see each page is covering a specific type of species, as well as the intro going into some more bird behavior generic things. So yeah, a lot of great bird books out there for you to use to expand your knowledge on birding. Plus these things make great gifts for your birding friends too. So keep your eye out anytime you're going through a thrift store, maybe you're browsing through Amazon for something like this to give to someone. All right, diving into the next set of education resources, we have podcasts. Now it seems that nowadays there's a podcast for everything, and birding is no different, albeit it's not as saturated of a market as other areas and other industries. Still, there's some great ones out there, and I'm going to list a few out here quick. First, there's the ABA podcast, the American Birding Association, one of the biggest organizations in birding. That one comes out every Thursday and is hosted by Nate Swick, according to their website. There's also the Badgerland Birding Podcast. They're one of the biggest names on YouTube in the world of birding, and they started their own podcast. Again, I've not listened to this one personally, but they've had some pretty cool guests on that I've noticed just from the titles of the show. Getting to a few of the ones that I do listen to regularly, the Bird Joy podcast hosted by Dexter Patterson and Jason Hall is such a fun, lighthearted show for you to listen to. While it isn't primarily focused on education, they do share all kinds of different tidbits of knowledge, and depending on who their guest is, you could learn a ton from that specific guest. Their description on Apple Podcasts says, "We bring enthusiasts from around the globe to share the joy of birding, inspire curiosity, and build a welcoming space for everyone." I think that sounds pretty good to me, and I think you'd enjoy that too. Lastly, my favorite bird-focused podcast is The Science of Birds, or The Science of Birds, as the host says at the beginning of every episode. This one is hosted by Ivan Phillipson. He's a professional and naturalist guide. He has studied biology, and he's just incredibly knowledgeable. These are some of the most well-researched podcasts I have ever listened to. In each episode, he covers a specific topic. That might be something like the background and history of birds, where they came from, or that might just be a species of birds. One of the episodes I listened to most recently was focused on mergansers, so he covered that group and family as a whole, talked about all the different mergansers and some of the common traits they all have and behaviors you might expect to see from them. It's a really great podcast. I highly recommend you check it out. If I'm working out in the gym and lifting weights, you actually will commonly find that playing in my AirPods as I'm getting my workout in. Let's get into YouTube. It would be really silly if I didn't mention YouTube, as that's the platform you're currently watching on. YouTube is a great resource for learning all kinds of things, and birding is no different. Of course, I'm going to plug my own channels. I'm trying to make some more educational content as I get more experience with birding, so please subscribe if you haven't already. But there are some other great channels out there too that I want to mention. Firstly, my friend Jordan from Bright Eyed Birding is launching his new channel this year called Bright Eyed Birding Learn. There's already an episode on there about bird seed, and I believe there's some more coming really quickly. I think there's a Juncos one about to go up too, so give that channel a look, as he's going to provide a lot of cool resources for you to learn about. I also really love the channel Doug Hitchcock's. That's just his name. It's after him, I guess it's named, but he covers very niche topics within birding from a very unique perspective of a well-versed birder and eBird reviewer. He talked about what you might do when you see a rare bird alert in one of his videos. He also covered how to find rare birds, as well as other really cool topics. Definitely give his channel a look out, because those episodes, like the Science of Birds podcast I mentioned earlier, are very well researched and thought out and constructed. Leslie the Bird Nerd is also a huge channel here on YouTube that does various features about birding, usually focused on a specific species. I've only watched a few of these different videos, but I definitely plan to go back and look at more, because I do enjoy them every time I watch them. There's a bunch of other birding channels around. They're not necessarily focused on education, but you can also always pick up tidbits of information as you're watching. So don't limit yourself just to the ones I mentioned. There's plenty out there. If you look on any of the streaming platforms, you can often find a birding documentary. There's plenty out there. Lots to learn from there. I'll mention a few here. Netflix has a documentary called Birders, which really dials in to the US-Mexico border, which is a huge hotspot for birding, because that's one of the best spots in the US for us to get some birds that don't show up anywhere else. That Rio Grande Valley area is an incredible location for birding. It's somewhere I really wish I can get to someday. But anyways, the documentary itself focuses on both sides of the border. It shows the passion from the people of Mexico and the people of the US and what they share for the love of birding. Then produced by National Geographic and currently on Disney+, you have Extraordinary Birder with Christian Cooper. This is the same person I mentioned who wrote the book earlier. He also has a documentary series where he goes to a couple of different locations, just talks about maybe some of the challenges of birding. He covers some really cool species in those areas. He visits places like Central Park in New York, but then he also gets over to Hawaii and talks about some of the unique endemic species in Hawaii. Let's talk about networking. This one's actually probably the best resource for brand new birders. Maybe outside of field guides, but still, getting involved with people who are already birders is just gonna help you that much more. There's various Facebook groups already designed for this. There's things like the What's This Bird Facebook group. For me specifically, we have a Birding in Utah Facebook group, which is pretty awesome to be able to ask questions in when you're facing an ID challenge, or maybe you wanna learn just something about birding. I'm also in the North American Gulls Facebook group. I'm in the Utah Rare Bird Alert Facebook group too. The networking isn't strictly obviously limited to Facebook. There's also all kinds of in-person events. Going out and birding with others through maybe a regular held weekly bird walk, such as the ones we have here in Salt Lake hosted by the Tracy Aviary, is a great way to get introduced to birding and get better at birding by learning from some really experienced birders. There's also Discord servers and WhatsApp groups that are also out there. But seriously, I would highly recommend those bird walks with others that are held pretty regularly in a lot of different areas. Check in with your local nature center or the local chapter of the Audubon Society. I'm sure you'd be able to find something that you could attend and learn from. Lastly, and probably the best one, is just getting out in the field. What's the point in learning all this information if you're not going to actually put it into practice? Getting out in the field is going to allow you to observe all these things that you've been learning about and really solidify that knowledge in your head as you see it happen in real time. And if something is happening that's just new and interesting you've never seen before, maybe note it down to go and do some more research later, or just ask questions about as you see those things. For that purpose, you might find something like a field notebook useful, or maybe just using the Notes app on your phone to list down some interesting behaviors, or maybe list down traits of a bird you can't quite identify, what they're doing in the moment, maybe certain field markings that are very identifiable. So yeah, get out there and go birding. All right, I of course promised you a fun method to learn about different things about birds. And right here we have Wingspan. This is far and away my favorite board game. I have every single expansion. I also have the app on my phone and I bought every single expansion there too. Needless to say, I love this game. It's amazing as a birder, but even if you're not a birder, a lot of my friends love this too, and they're not very big into birding. It's a great board game that I would highly recommend. And the reason why I say this is a fun way to learn about birds is because each time you play a bird, you could see in the card there's a little fun fact there. And one of my friends actually makes it a requirement that we have to read the fact aloud as we're playing the bird, or it doesn't count. And you'd honestly be surprised, just by having those expansions in Europe and Oceania and Asia, I've learned about so many birds, and as I've been watching YouTube videos from those various regions, I've recognized birds just because I've played with them in Wingspan before, which is kind of crazy and something I didn't expect to happen. This is just one fun example that goes to show that there are education resources wherever you look. You just have to have the curiosity to go out there and find them. I only scratched the surface here. I think I provided a pretty good list for you to get started, but there's of course other resources too. I didn't even get into things like festivals, conferences, or webinars in this one because I haven't personally attended any of those. I do hope to pretty soon, but that's yet another resource. So if there's something I missed in my list of educational resources that was something you really enjoy, or maybe was instrumental into your growth as a birder, please leave it in the comments. It'll only help me personally, and it'll help all the other birders looking for educational resources. As promised, I'm also going to walk you through one of my personal examples. So in 2025, it is my goal to get better at gull identification. This is something that has pained me for a while. As I've approached a group of gulls out in the field, I always felt a little bit of dread on being like, oh, darn it, I'm not going to be able to tell these apart. This is going to be super challenging. I'm just going to have to write gull species on my checklist instead of being able to tell that it's a ring-billed gull versus a California gull. Beginning to solve this problem and achieve my goal, I'm employing a list of the things that I mentioned today. Firstly, I started with YouTube. I started searching for how to identify gulls, and I came across a bunch of recordings of PowerPoint presentations and old webinars that didn't really jive with me, so I kind of left that to the side. But then moving on from YouTube, I moved to the field guides. I started with my Sibley guide and my North America guide, looking at every single thing that I could about these specific gulls. Well, this is super helpful and it starts to teach me a little bit about the various gulls in my area. It wasn't the end-all be-all. So I added some additional strategies. On my phone, I have the podcast episode from the Science of Birds downloaded called Gulls, Terns, and Skimmers, the family of Laridae. You can see there. I don't know if that'll focus. There it is. I haven't yet dove into it, but I will very shortly. I joined the North American Gulls Facebook group, which seriously is a treasure trove of knowledge. There are people posting such specific examples of trying to tell birds apart in the gull family. And I couldn't believe the level of detail that they go down to with just tiny minute details about the bill or certain different types of the wing feathers that gulls have. I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot just from reading through some of those posts, and as I have my own challenges, I'll reach out to that group and see if they could assist me in identifying some tough gulls. Lastly, on my Christmas wish list this year, I had some birding focused things, one of them being the Gull Guide of North America by Amari Yesh. He is, I believe, the admin of that Facebook group I just mentioned, and man, this thing is chocked full of information about gulls, and I really think this will help me. So that's my example of how I'm employing some of the strategies I mentioned today to get better educated about a specific aspect of birding that I have a goal for. Again, I'll call out to you. If you have any favorite education resources, leave them in the comments. I'm also curious to hear an aspect of birding you are hoping to get more educated on in this coming year. I hope this video was helpful for you all. Again, my name is Hawken. This is Hawken the Lens. Thank you as always for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Happy birding.